This is a lecture on Sigmund Freud's Civilization and its Discontents. This is part of our fourth module in Social and Political Philosophy class. As I mentioned during the Hegel um, lecture, what we're trying to do is to criticize a little bit the project of modernity and what that might mean for the ways in which we understand justice and in the ways in which justice is achieved, right? So, Sigmund Freud, a lot of you might have heard about him. He is not educated as a philosopher. In that way, he is not a philosopher, right? But because of the way in which he talks about consciousness and the unconscious, he is brought into discussions of philosophy all the time. Um, he lived around 1856 to 1939. He had a really productive life. He formed as a physician, right? And he created this whole theory that's called psychoanalysis. And you might have seen psychoanalysis in many of the shows or movies that you watch because Freud started this whole therapy in which we go to an expert and we talk to this person about the problems that we have, the weird dreams that we have experienced, or those anxious sensations that we get throughout the day. Freud was trying to say that there is a part of our own being that is unknown to us and that sometimes it comes through in those dreams or strange behaviors that we might have. He talked a lot about what anxiety was, but also about what neurosis and neurotic behavior meant. Woody Allen, I'll mention this in a couple of slides more, but Woody Allen's movies deal a lot with this kind of neurosis in a psychoanalytic way, and his characters, he himself, are referred to as the neurotic par excellence, according to Freud's own definitions of neuroticism. So, one of the things that you should know, especially because we are analyzing civilization and its discontent, is that Freud was really saddened by the turn of events in Europe with the rise of Nazism and what Nazism was doing. I think this is interesting. In 1909, he came to New York and he saw that voyage across the sea as this magnificent experience and the hope of all the things that man can create. Nobody knows why, but when Freud was asked if he would ever return to New York, he always said no. So there's all this gossip about what might have happened to Freud when he was in New York, that although he talked about how amazing it had been to come to the Americas, he decided that he would never come. Um, he was a very sensible man, and you might have heard and you will hear criticisms about him and the way in which he treated his patients or what being treated by Freud was like. There are a lot of movies about this. And one of the reasons why people criticize him for the way in which he treated his patients is because back in the day he used to give cocaine to his patients, not fully realizing that it would form a different kind of habit, right? So there are good things and bad things about Freud, but I think that just makes him, to me, that just makes him a more exciting thinker to analyze. So he was influenced mostly by the literature and artistic figures that he had studied. Biographies say that he was really smart. So he read Da Vinci, Shakespeare, the classics, and you see all these things in his different readings. He has books on literature, creativity. He has a sort of monography on Michelangelo, right? enthralled by the way in which creativity is shown in some people, but not in all of us, right? He read Darwin and Nietzsche, and people say that he uses these two thinkers as the basis of his analysis. But obviously, he was a not I was going to say neurophilosopher, but that didn't exist back then. That's something that we have. He was interested in neurosciences. So he saw in the brain a system of economy. Sometimes he talks about it that way, a system of forces that interacts with us with or without our knowledge. So this is one of the things that is going to make him talk about the unconscious later on, which again, nobody talked about the unconscious till Freud came along. In philosophy, he influenced a lot of people. Some of them in the positive way, some of them reacted to his theories and said, like, this is how Freud is wrong and let me prove it. But that's an influence, right? Like, for philosophers, you can be influenced in the positive way, being motivated to follow the steps of the philosopher or developing their system further on. But you can also influence someone in the negative way where they want to discuss your ideas, where they want to say, no, this is where you got it wrong. So in the positive, people think that he influenced Carl Jung, and Carl Jung developed a lot of writings about the dream theory and what dreams tell us. Although Freud had a really close relationship with Jung, a lot of the writings, autobiographies, and even Jung's and Freud's personal letters suggest that Jung took the theory of these forces that interact with us in a direction that Freud wasn't interested in analyzing. So, yes, Carl Jung is influenced by Freud, but Freud apparently towards the end of his relationship with Jung disapproved of the way in which Jung was doing psychoanalysis. Herbert Marcuse is a philosopher very influential when it comes to sociology and the study of ideology. So you might read him if you take like anthropology or sociology or psychology classes. Jacques Lacan is one of the first and foremost psychoanalytic figures of our time, French, and he's dead, but he has influenced psychoanalysis to such a degree because his writings are very influenced by the philosophical underpinnings and neurological underpinnings, and also because he's French and the way in which the French produce culture, there are lectures by Lacan. You can actually go to YouTube and see Jacques Lacan giving a lecture in French with English subtitles. Because he was on TV, I think on Saturdays or Sunday nights. Talking about the negative ways of influencing someone, Julia Kristeva and Simone de Beauvoir are going to use Freud and tell us how Freud is wrong and how Freud theories can only come through to fruition in a paternalistic kind of way, in a male chauvinistic guided society. And I think they have a lot of arguments in their favor. I think they deal with that evidence pretty well. And they're going to develop, Julia Kristeva is going to develop a psychoanalysis of the feminine, and Simone de Beauvoir later on is going to develop an existentialist view that includes women, right? If you have read Camus or Sartre or in a lesser degree Heidegger, you see how existentialism was male dominated. So Simone de Beauvoir comes into that scene, and she's going to bring all these powerful weapons in her book, The Other Sex, where she talks about how philosophers do not understand what the difference are between being a man and being a woman, and this is present in Freud's theories, that we can still see in our society acting today. Freud together with, and here they are, Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche, were dubbed by Paul Ricoeur the masters of suspicion. And the reason why he did this is because they tried to see what's wrong with the presuppositions, with the standard way of thinking that society has. So most of the influences that Freud had, like those names, are trying to do the same, even if if they disagree with him, right? So Kristeva, Adorno, Merleau-Ponty, Louis Althusser are going to study why culture is formulated in the way it is, and they take Freud as their basis. That doesn't mean that they take him for all his worth. So in class, I just want to make this note. I have no idea why I forgot to schedule Nietzsche. Nietzsche is one of my favorite philosophers. So I will give you an optional lecture on Nietzsche and his first essay in the genealogy of morals. But obviously, you're not required to use him or to even listen to the lecture. I just think he's awesome. Um, so Freud is present in our daily culture in ways in which no other thinker is. You may not be aware of this if you have never studied Freud before, but think about the way in which we talk about the unconscious or unconsciously doing something, whether it's good or bad, the Oedipus complex and its feminine opposition, the Electra complex, and this idea that boys fall in love with their mothers when they're really young and they see the father as opposition, right? So all these stories that we have where men marry somebody else, but that woman is actually like very similar to their mom. Freud would be interested, to say the least, in that. We also talk about repression, and repression is one of the things that is going to come up a lot in civilization and its discontent. In popular culture, we have a lot of examples of the Freudian slip, right? And I just love this cartoon where you have the definition of a Freudian slip through an example of the Freudian slip. So somehow your unconscious makes itself present by making you trip on something that you wanted to say or something that you wanted to do. And then he talks about the death drive and modern gaming theory. Yeah, there's like modern gaming theory. Why people play video games. They say that it has to do with this idea that we want to use our violent instincts. We also want to see what it would feel like to either kill or be killed. So there are a lot of people who use Freud in relation to video games. And I mentioned Woody Allen before, but before Woody Allen, we actually had Alfred Hitchcock using a lot of the concepts that Freud developed in most of his movies, right? So whenever you see an Alfred Hitchcock movie, you want to be really aware of all those different indicators that he has there where he's trying to puncture the distance between the conscious and the unconscious. So this is the thinker we're going to be dealing with, and in a second you can go to the second part of this lecture so we can start talking about civilization and its discontent.